healthy and sick societies. Reason, spirit, and appetite are to be found in all human beings, but each is stronger in some human beings than in others, and which of them most characterizes a person determines which of the three social classes of Plato's ideal society he will fall into. The vast majority of people are appetitive. That does not mean that their appetites are ungoverned by reason and spirit, but that reason and spirit are in them primarily oriented not toward the pursuit of wisdom and honor for their own sakes, but rather toward the pursuit of food and drink, property, marriage and family, and material goods in general. They make up the productive class in Plato's city: farmers, merchants, laborers, and so on. A much smaller group is primarily spirited, oriented by temperament to the pursuit of honor and justice. These make up the auxiliary class, which comprise the military and police in Plato's ideal city. The smallest and ruling class are the philosopher kings, in whom reason dominates so thoroughly that pursuit of the true and the good for their own sakes is their basic orientation. It cannot be emphasized too strongly that Plato's idea of a philosopher is as different from what most people today think of when they hear that word, as his conception of reason is different from the modern economist's conception. He is not talking about a society run by effete middle-class college professors, nor does he have in mind thinkers adhering to just any old philosophical system. He is talking about Platonist philosophers specifically, which entails, among other things, those committed to essentialism and opposed to relativism, skepticism, and allied doctrines. And he is talking about an elite drawn from the auxiliary class and held to a regimen so physically, intellectually, and morally demanding that no one inclined toward a life of tenured ease would be capable of it, or even interested in it. Famously, the guardians of Plato's ideal society, which comprise the auxiliary class and the philosopher kings together, live communally and are forbidden spouses, families, and private property of their own. This is not socialism, which in the real world imposes austerity on the majority while the rulers live like capitalists. On the contrary, the majority in Plato's city, the productive class, are permitted the freedom, material benefits, and ordinary family life the elite are denied. Rather, the egalitarianism of the guardian classes is that of the military barracks or the monastery, imposed only on the few because only the few are capable of it. Its point is to prevent the guardians, as far as possible, from having any personal or material stake in governmental policy, so that they will be guided only by disinterested reason. For present purposes, what matters are not the details of Plato's ideal society, but rather its idealization of a certain conception of reason, both in the individual and in the socio-political order. As the mid-20th century philosopher John Wilde argued, Plato was essentially the founder of the natural law tradition in Western ethics. Good human beings are, in Plato's view, those in whom desire is subordinated to the objective natural order of things grasped by reason, and a good society is one governed by those who best know and practice this natural law. Just as a rightly ordered psyche is one in which reason rules the appetites through the agency of spirit, so too a rightly ordered society is one in which philosopher kings rule the productive class through the auxiliaries. The greater the deviation from this model, the more unjust and disordered a society becomes, and the degrees of deviation parallel the degrees of depravity that can exist in an individual psyche. Indeed, for Plato, types of unjust society are defined less by their governing procedures than by the disordered character types that dominate them and are admired within them. There are four, each one worse than its predecessor: timocracy, oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny. Timocracy is the rule of the spirited part of the psyche, in which honor displaces wisdom as the highest end. The timocratic character prizes the military virtues above all others, so that the ethos of the auxiliaries pushes aside that of the philosopher kings as the ruling ideal. Spartan severity would be the paradigm. The appetites are kept in check in the timocratic personality type, as they are in the philosopher king, but out of honor rather than regard for reason as such. Timocracy also involves a move away from the disinterestedness of the philosopher king's rationality, for timocratic man's excessive regard for honor makes him highly competitive. For this reason, Plato thinks the timocratic personality eventually becomes unduly interested in money as a surrogate for martial accomplishment. In this way, timocracies have a tendency to give way to oligarchies. Oligarchy is the first of three degenerate regimes in which appetite comes progressively to dominate individuals and society, but it is the least bad of them. The oligarchic personality type is one in which money becomes the dominant end. The appetites thus take the upper hand over both reason and spirit. However, because the acquisition of wealth requires time and discipline, even oligarchic man puts some restraints on his desires. The timocratic ideals of honor and courage give way, but they are replaced by bourgeois virtues like thrift, hard work, and concern for respectability. But there is money to be made in catering to baser desires. As if he were describing the recent history of American business, Plato tells us that oligarchs inevitably cannot resist seeking profit in catering to the frivolous and immoral wants of the young, and in taking advantage of the foolishness of those willing to incur massive debt. Their own children also come to be spoiled, soft, idle, and profligate. Love of money and adequate self-discipline in its citizens are two things that can't coexist in any society, says Plato. The rich come to have no greater concern for excellence than the poor. Appealing to an insect metaphor, Plato says that a class of shiftless and unruly drones arises in this decadence, dominated by unnecessary desires, such as an excessive interest in sex and a taste for a more varied and luxurious diet. A mashup of hooligans, swingers, and foodies, as it were. In this way, oligarchy tends to give way to democracy.